Hello, and welcome to the Future of Tourism podcast. Today we talk very candidly about the paradigm shift that we all face in the tourism industry. We're past romanticizing miraculous recovery and a quick return to the way it was, and my guest today is ready to dig in on the topic of a new normal for the industry, for destinations, and for destination organizations. Greg Klassen is a friend and a peer that I, along with forward-thinking and innovative leaders in the industry around the world, hold in high esteem. He is the former CEO of the Canadian Tourism Commission, the architect of the wildly successful marketing strategy for the 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympic Games, and a faculty member at the Royal Roads University School of Tourism and Hospitality. I personally spent the last 10 years trying to solve a complex problem that Greg created. And that's a compliment. Let me explain. While he was VP Marketing and Strategy at the Canadian Tourism Commission, Greg led the team that drove Canada's Global Futures brand ranking from number 12 to number 1. In the wake of that accomplishment, it became very clear that while Canada ranked consistently in the top 3 globally as a destination of choice, it actually achieved conversion, the realization of actual inbound travel based on that intention, closer to 14th or 15th. And with that, the work for the next 10 years was set. In Ontario, Canada, my team was charged with understanding why there was that gap between intention and conversion, and then put to work to develop strategies and programs to solve it. As they say, that started a whole thing. Spoiler alert on that. Destination networks, stakeholder engagement, socially driven marketing, asset development, and destination alignment all figure prominently in the solutions. Today, Greg is a founding partner with 2031 Consulting. He advises senior leadership teams around the world on competitive destination marketing strategies, brand positioning, and investment opportunities. He is a renowned thought leader on disruption in destination marketing and the links between travel and tourism and economic development. Good morning, Greg. How are you today? Where are you?
Hey, thanks, David. I'm great. I'm doing very well here, and I'm in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada this morning.
Greg, when you founded 2031, we were on a trajectory for reaching close to 2 billion travelers by that year, 2031. People all over the world who are pursuing a dream of a life less ordinary through international travel. In the last decade, we've been on track for that, if not even above it and beyond. That's all changed, hasn't it?
It really has all changed. I mean, we founded 2031 5 years ago with a reference to something that was really important because the growth of tourism is one of the fastest growing industries in the world. We knew that it took until 2012 the first billion international travelers would double to 2 billion in less than 20 years after that. We're on a very, very fast growth trajectory. And of course, that's really important. And that's great for many countries out there that'll earn a lot of revenue and hire and employ a lot of people in supporting their own tourism industries. But of course, we've seen in the past number of years that that's caused some problems as well. Over tourism, degradation of communities, of cultures, of transportation networks, the Greta effect. All of those things had a negative impact on tourism, and tourism was taking its place, alongside oil sands and open pit mining and some of those other challenging industries out there. So we've taken a pause on tourism, and while we believe very strongly that tourism will come back, it will grow again, and it's really tough on some of those people right now. That pause might be a good thing. It gives us an opportunity to rethink the future of tourism.
Well, in a recent article in Travel Pulse, just days into this crisis, you said over the next decade, global tourism will undergo unprecedented change, especially in the context of COVID-19. There will be winners and losers. Competition for travelers will intensify, as will attention for capital, air routes, infrastructure, and investment. Traditional marketing channels will disrupt at an even faster pace. Yet getting the fundamentals of tourism, uniquely defining tourism for destinations, will be critical to succeeding in getting more than their fair share, but sustainable share. You also said those destination operators who look in the rearview mirrors to guide them to the future are looking the wrong way. So imagine this. We're a mid-market meetings and conventions destination. Our existing business model at its core is almost irrelevant for 18 months or more, and maybe changed forever. We're sitting in the driver's seat, seatbelt on, we've checked the rear view, and we're ready to drive forward. What do we do next?
Yeah, I mean, those are really tough points, right? They're tough to swallow. All of those ideas and those thoughts about that disruption and that change that's happening in our business is really challenging for us to follow because our blueprints that we have been following have been, more or less easy to follow, not that easy. We have helped to invent some of this future, but tourism's been an accidental success in many respects. I know that a lot of us love to point to our strategic prowess for the growth of tourism, but that growth happened probably due to external factors outside of much of our control. The deregulation of airlines and low cost carriers and the investment that countries were making in tourism and the growth of the internet, all of those things, the growth of China, for instance, has changed how we've done business and has supported the fast growth of the future of tourism. But again, part of that now says we've got to look and say, what are the levers that we have to help us grow tourism? Some of those levers that we got by accident are no longer there. And now we have to sort of figure out how we can create our own competitive advantages as destinations, how we can sort of see into the future and determine where are we going to put our marketing efforts. Is it in the business? Is it a mid-market, small and medium-sized business market, or is it a leisure market? Is it sports tourism? Is it local tourism? All the destinations are grappling with all of these ideas going forward for sure.
So when you look at this around the world and you look for working models, I look at the European cities marketing model and the work they did over the past probably 6 or 7 years, really dealing with over tourism. And I find it fascinating that in their dealing with that crisis, they've sort of blueprinted a number of things will inform tourism destination management models as we go forward. Now, let's remember, even in Lyon and Dijon, which are well, more so Lyon, are destination meeting markets, they're going to be focused on that same shorter haul travel, and they're rethinking it. But let's talk about the kind of tourism management that lines up with sustainability. You spoke on this at the Victoria conference this year.
Yeah, the Economist magazine, I think they got it right when they sort of stated about 2 weeks ago that those trends that were already in play will be the trends that guide us into the future. We look at markets like Amsterdam, who decided not to market to tourists anymore, to switch very quickly into destination management, managing their assets that they have, managing their tourism opportunity, reducing reliance on those coaches and cruise ships that brought in mass numbers of tourists over a very short period of time. Those are the destinations that we figured we're looking to now to see, well, what have they done and how have they done it? The World Economic Forum this year talked about stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism meaning not just a return on our shareholder investments, but employee management, working within communities, supporting the environment, all of those, the multiple bottom lines, not just the economic bottom line that we're looking at from an industry perspective and saying, how can we apply that model to the tourism industry? How can we help destinations look at the caring nature of tourism, at support for communities, support for local cultures, support, and of course, providing that return on investment that we need to get out of tourism because of its opportunities to employ people and provide quality of life.
So let's talk about some of the things that are available. I mean, it is a daunting challenge we have in front of us, but I do believe, as you point out, there are places and tools out there that are models for this. And I know you talked with Greg Oates. Greg was on the show, and he talked specifically about the success of communities that had built intentional stakeholder networks. We talked with Jack Johnson, his lexicon of tourism and how we engage with civic bodies. those are two more tools. The ECM model of what they've gone through as they future-proof Barcelona is another model. What tools do you see out there that we need to bring to bear now, and give us sort of a laundry list, because we're all out here thinking about how we restructure and what assets and tools we use to do that.
I mean, you've got two of the smartest guys talking about that stuff out there. Is about that community-based engagement. But that's a word that's been going for decades. I mean, we've been involved in community-based tourism for over a decade. It's really just finally caught on into into the big North American or European cities itself. And the tools really are. It's about engagement. It's about understanding the impact and effect that tourism can have on all of these disparate stakeholder groups, and supporting for their communities. Because ultimately, if we continued on that same trajectory, and if we were to get to 2 billion travelers by 2031, tourism would effectively consume itself. It would just be degrading the tourism experience for the actual traveler, simply because we weren't there to, we'd love to go see the Taj Mahal, but all we're really seeing is the back of the heads of the people 20 feet in front of us seeing the Taj Mahal. So we're really capturing photos of people's heads, and in the distance somewhere out there is actually the Taj Mahal. We're better off just downloading those images from Google, rather than taking them ourselves and being there. Tourism, again, we have an opportunity to press the pause button, hard on a lot of small and medium-sized businesses right now, but we also have an opportunity to rebuild it for the future.
So, and I know you, Greg Klassen, you wouldn't pass up an opportunity to see the Taj Mahal, but in a future perfect way, what would that look like?
Well, I guess it would be managed, wouldn't it? This is about destination management. It's really about, maybe it is buying a ticket so that only 1,000 people an hour or 100 people an hour, whatever the number is, can actually go and have that type of experience itself. Maybe it's peak pricing. Maybe it's using all kinds of tools that the hotel industry uses, that the airline industry uses, to determine when and how people would be able to see these iconic assets and have those experiences.
Well, it is about those tools. And it's interesting. I had a discussion yesterday with a contemporary of yours, Michael Crockett from Ottawa, and I wanted to talk to him specifically about his time in the airline industry. We're reimagining what it's like to go to airports. We're reimagining what it's like to go see the Taj Mahal, or to line up for the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. The tools or the technologies that we need to be able to do that are out there, but we have not perfected them. Standing in line at the Sagrada is still a pain in the butt. We will get better at this, won't we?
We have to get better at this. I mean, right now, can you imagine standing? I have stood in that lineup before, and on a hot summer Barcelona day, and it wasn't delightful. And that degraded my tourism experience for sure. And I don't fully expect either that I get ushered right in. But again, we have tools and technologies. We have these things that can help us determine that we have to show up within a 15-minute range to our timed appointment. They do have these. The tourism industry is absolutely applying these across the board. Others are just simply not applying them, or too lazy to apply them. But can you imagine that lineup 6 feet apart from each other? That lineup would circle the city of Barcelona itself. So we absolutely need to start to utilize the technologies we've had access to for years and start to apply them.
So we make it a running line from Park Güell on the hill all the way down to the Sagrada, and that's your day. Now, I want to say, props to Barcelona. When you do get into the Sagrada, the fact that they've controlled the environment, the fact that it's not massively thronged when you're inside, it is an amazing experience. It really is.
And we don't want to take away from those amazing experiences. There are wonderful, amazing things to see in the world. These cultural iconic places absolutely should see visitors, and we have to make sure that we do have access to these treasures, but in a more responsible way.
So talk to me about the kind of alignment that you foster. You're now working all over the world. I had the great pleasure to work with you while you're in Canada, and I'm not being gratuitous when I say, there's a lot of people here that have a huge respect for what you brought to the table there, and thank you for that. And you really did influence the course of the Regional Tourism Office for a decade, because
you and I have had this conversation before. Closing the gap from the last 100 feet of the marketing rope became our obsession. How do you actually get the destination lined up with the provincial body or the state body, and then with a national body? But that said, you're now working all over the world. What are you seeing out there with your international clients in the middle of this?
Yeah, we're working with a lot of destinations right now. A couple of them in Canada here, but many of them in other parts of the world. We're working with South Africa. We're working with the Middle East right now in Abu Dhabi, as well as Dubai. Working with Jordan, and they're all at different stages of dealing with the challenges that they're facing right now. Um, I do see some of them really looking and saying the pause button is a gift. I know, again, I can't stress enough how challenging it is on some of those businesses and employment and economies and stuff like that. It just can't stress that enough. But the gift itself is to say tourism has grown in a very haphazard nature. It has not necessarily been by strategy or by design. It's just simply grown. And we've taken advantage of that growth for sure. But now that we have that pause button, don't we have an opportunity to help manage the next phase of growth for our destinations? It will come back, but let's make sure that we get perhaps a higher quality of visitor. Perhaps they're spending more money and paying for the real cost that they're incurring in terms of tourism, the infrastructure costs and the supporting costs. So markets like, surprisingly, South Africa is looking and saying, how can we rebuild our organization? How can we help rebuild our tourism industry so that it reflects the vision that we have for South Africa's tourism industry in the future? One that is maybe more about quality, one that is more about management, one that's more about dispersion of visitors to less iconic places and to more of those places that we just never heard of because they've never been marketed to us. And so effectively, it really is just that kind of change that some of our destinations are looking at. And I really, really love to be part of that story. I'm really excited about it.
So in that line that I've heard you use many times, people dreaming and seeking a life less ordinary through international travel. You're a well-traveled individual. We both had the luxury of literally being all over the world, and it's been a fascinating ride. I look at my child coming out of university now, who's just at the beginning of that, and I think how old are your children now?
I have a 20-year-old.
So your 20-year-old. Do you remember 20, Greg?
I'd love to have 20 again, but I have to be in bed by 10.
Yeah, there it is. I look ahead and I know, some of the values we instilled in Tate, my daughter, is this whole idea of making the world a more familiar and globally connected place through travel. So let's jump ahead 10 years now. Let's go for 11. Let's go for 2031. What's it like for them? What is, how do we enrich them? And I'm hearing the kernel of the solution, what you're talking about. I have an idea, but I want to ask you first.
Yeah. Again, I never want to take the fun out of travel, right? I mean, I think, I would love to say that our future travelers are going to be going to destinations and learning about themselves and learning about their other cultures and having a really introspective experience. And gosh, I'd love to say that. But you know what? Sometimes you just want a day drink on the beach. And and so I want for them to have a mix of those kinds of experiences, something that just gives them an opportunity to get away from their daily lives or their work or and just do something a little bit different, even just the weather for a week. So that's got to be really a big part of our future of tourism. But I also want them to come back and learn something, just a little bit extra, just a little bit more knowledge about the place that they've been and the challenges that people from other cultures face, but also something perhaps that is so interesting that they've learned that they can bring them back and help recontribute to our own society because they've learned something different.
When you were at the CTC, you were a big advocate of the what was the name of the program for signature experiences?
Right.
Isn't it interesting how many signature experiences were not urban? They were those. They were those fascinating, less ordinary things. But talk about that for a second.
Well, I mean, I absolutely love that program. Of all the programs I was blessed to be able to do, That was one of my favorite programs, and it really, and again, it wasn't just me. Of course, I had a whole team of people that helped us do that, and they're still doing it. And just that program is the most copied program by destinations around the world. I was listening to the CEO of Tourism Australia talk about their great new program, and they were using words I'd written at least 7 or 8 years ago. It's being adopted in Iceland. It's being adopted in Jordan. It's being looked at in Kenya. And so I love that it's being adopted because it's a good program. But you're right. Many of those the ideas behind that program were to say, get us outside of the places that we know and get us into places that we don't know. And of course, for Canada, it's all about sort of experiences outdoors, horseback riding through the Rockies, glamping in on the wilds of the west coast of Vancouver Island or Newfoundland. All of those things were part and parcel of that Signature Experiences collection. It really helped us relook at what tourism can be to our travelers.
Well, and that started us down a whole path of experiential travel and experience and what we call animating a destination. But I still remember Dr. Nancy Arsenault standing up and going on and on about, you have to go to this little town outside Winnipeg and you have to make real pierogies with the Ukrainian church ladies. And people were lining up months in advance to get their spot to do that.
Because people want to learn, right? We want to learn something new. It's the Canadian equivalent of going to Tuscany and learning and taking a week at a chef's kitchen to learn how to cook a real Italian food. We have that in Canada. Of course, pierogies are part of our Ukrainian heritage, and Manitoba is the perfect place to do that.
Well, we have it, but it's a lot easier in 1995 to communicate come to Tuscany for a culinary experience than it is to take a leap and begin product development, knowing that the only way you're going to find the razor thin segment of pierogi aficionados who are evenly spread through 33 million people is if you have a digital tool like social media.
And guess what? We do. We have digital technologies. We can find needles in haystacks. Now, you just put it out there. There are teams of thousands of people who will travel to learn how to make an authentic pierogi, and we simply have the tools to find them. Again, there's so many great technologies in tourism right now, and almost all of them go underutilized. They're still focused on the billboard and the one-page cooperative ad in the Boston Globe, trying to sell what we have to sell through. And again, these are complementary media. We don't necessarily want to lose those media because they do play a role in awareness creation, but we need to complement them with being and using the digital technologies that work so much harder.
So you developed a tourism traveler type index, and it was really what was it called again?
The Explore Quotient. Yeah.
Which was a really great tool, specifically and especially as directing large marketing programs. And then you evolved forward and really came down to the idea of something that I think I heard first from you, the avid as marketer. You let your avid do your marketing. And it's made such a difference in the last 8 years in so many places. I know destinations where the idea of having a budget to attract mountain bikers is just irrelevant, not going to happen. And those destinations have evolved through social media only to become some of the best mountain bike destinations in the United States. And it was avids informing avids. And it was the old Breck shampoo. And they told two friends and they told two friends. You were just starting that at the CTC, and then you decided to go international on us. How is social media playing out in the international markets for you?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm lumping it all together. I don't even call it social media, and I don't even call it digital media anymore. I just really try to call it media because that's really what it is. It is the most effective way of doing that. I'm now the big advocate. David, I think I got this from you. I might have stolen it from you actually, but instead of $1 million campaign, we can now do 100 campaigns for $10,000 each to find those aficionados, those avid experiences, the communities of interest, and those who are willing and actually eager to travel to have that experience, whether it's mountain biking or hiking or rock climbing or or frankly, just hanging out and playing chess with other people from around the world. There are aficionados for that. We have to find and tap into their media, and that's mostly digital. Is it the blog? Is it the social media posts? Is it the media that they're reading? Can we pull together a composite of personas and then target them and inspire and compel them to choose our destination for that purpose?
Well, I think we had a beer once in London, Ontario, and you said to me, so hang on, we walk around the destination and we look for fanatics, and then we try and figure out what the heck it is they're fanatic about here.
Yeah. Because everyone's got their thing. David, I do know that you love mountain biking, and I do know that you've got the scars to show it, how much you love it. And you will respond to an ad. I mean, I suspect you belong to a number of different forums that talk about traveling for the purposes of biking. You're ripe to be an influencer, but you're also ripe to consider another destination that perhaps you hadn't even thought of yet.
You made me think for the first time here, literally the first time, how much that experience has changed in 10 years. So for 10 years, have been lucky enough to go to an international destination every year somewhere. And those experiences are drastically changed in the last 3 years. They all very much more involve a full treatise on sustainability and your role in that destination. And you go behind the scenes. I was in Andalusia in Spain, and it turns out the mountain bike guide also works for the tourism commission, the government tourism commission. So we would go to not a Parma. Oh, that would be sacrilege to say that in Spain, a Spanish ham factory on the hillsides. But we didn't just go. We got to meet the mayor and talk about how they developed the program, and you're just immersed in it. But now that they say you're never in the target market, you just reminded me that I am in a target market for something, and it's changed in the last 3 years for sure.
Yeah, and if you talk to the adventure traveler people at ATTA, they'll tell you that the primary motivator for you to choose that destination would have been to mountain bike in that region. But all of the ancillary activities that you do are aligned with people who have those types of passions. You want to see how the sausages are made in that part of Spain. You want to have those cultural experiences that are part of that overall. You can't mountain bike all day. There are times to kick back and enjoy the local food and the local wine and learn a little bit about that local culture. So that goes hand in hand.
Well, and the luxury of having a mountain bike guide who worked for the government division of tourism Spain was I also got to see how my trip funded so many smaller pieces of that economy, because I could see exactly where our monies went for lunch, where we paid admission of obviously in our overall fees to get into the Parma factory. And it was a really great example where everybody was glad to see us because they all had a really clear role in the tourism experience and benefited from it in a sustainable way. There weren't 500 people at the factory, there were 10, but they dug it.
And how good did you feel being a traveler there? I mean, having that experience and knowing that some of the money that you'll leave behind is actually going to stay in the village, stay with some of those people. I mean, again, adventure travels for some people, not everybody. But there's a very clear path through adventure travel to see where your money goes, to see, how they attract you to a destination itself. And it may be just a little clue into what the future is going to look like for traditional travel. Are we going to be getting back on those big coaches? Or are they going to perhaps be a little bit smaller with a little bit more space in between? Are we going to have more meaningful experiences? Perhaps not try to fit in 6 or 7 things in a day, but maybe 2 or 3 things, but have a little bit more time at those experiences. Rather than go through all those checklists, maybe we'll have more meaningful times in smaller places.
Which doesn't mean we go to New York and not see anything. It means instead of doing 8 things in a day, we do 3 and they're deeper.
Yeah, it might just be that. I mean, there will be always those checklist destinations. New York is going to be one of them, where you have a hybrid of a whole bunch of things that you can see and do. But nobody comes back and says, from New York and says, I was in Times Square and I was awed. But somebody comes back from that little secret restaurant around the corner and down that alley and to the right. That comes back and say, you have no idea the kind of food that I had. That's the tourism experience. That's a small unique experience that people have. Nobody wants to have the same experience everybody else had.
Well, and you've got me thinking of another thing too. I mean, clearly the consumer's behavior will change in this. When we go to New York, we want spacing. But I worry, how does the industry change? Well, I realized something here. The consumer has to meet the industry part way too. You have to accept that 3 quality things in New York actually makes you feel safe and looked after. So don't expect, 3 things to cost, 3/8 of 8 things.
Yeah.
It's going to cost you the same equivalency.
We will see prices go up. I mean, again, this is the challenging part of tourism, is that we'll, at least in the next year or two, we're going to see some significant increases in pricing. It's just inevitable because of lower volumes will have and higher costs. Now, there are some tourism accountants, and apparently there is such a thing as a tourism accountant, and they'll be out there saying, yeah, we absolutely need to increase our prices. We're not really, truly, when we travel, bearing the full cost of the experience that they're providing to us. When we talk about the impact that we have on their infrastructure, on as things as basic as their sewage system or the water tables, those things do cost money, and they're seldom borne in the prices that we pay for tourism experiences. So those tourism accountants themselves will say this is a more realistic view of the cost of tourism, and that and that consumers should be bearing those costs.
And I know that those discussions are being had in the high halls all over. I mean, reinventing yourself as the airline industry or the luxury cruise travel industry. Those assets don't go away. The amount of disruption there is unprecedented. And I think you wrote a couple pieces in the past and talked to groups about the impacts of the SARS crisis in Canada, the post-tech recession. And you've always said the same thing. Afterwards, we see a really nice spring back for pent-up demand. The pent-up demand in this case is equally there, maybe even more. It's been 60 days. But the physical reality of the world and the virus isn't going to allow that spring back, is it?
Yeah, we've had lots of disruptions that have been in tourism, but nothing comes close to what we're experiencing right now. I mean, this is SARS put together with the 2008 financial crisis, added to I don't know, nothing been nearly as global as this kind of thing has. There's of course pent up demand. Everybody listening to this is itching to get out and get somewhere else, whether that's by car for the first few months. Maybe some are brave enough to get on an airplane, but we're all itching to go to other places because we just know it's such a big part of our DNA. It wasn't by accident it's the world's fastest growing industry. And it wasn't by accident that it's going to be 2 billion people by 2031. It's simply that it is part of our personas to have those experiences, to travel, to get outside sometimes our comfort zone, or just to go to a place to party and relax.
And I think sometimes we are checking things off a list. It's really glorious to go to Nepal. Yeah. But you know what? It's equally fascinating to go to Sonoma. And I think we got to focus more on the experience than maybe the bucket list.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think those bucket lists will come back. Maybe we're not going to travel every year or twice a year. Maybe we'll do it every 2 or 3 years. Maybe we'll be, in the old days, meaning 20 years ago, we saved up to travel. We put money aside so that we could travel. Now we're just hauling out our credit cards and slapping it down and getting on the cheapest and cheerful of the experience we could find. So maybe we're back to just saving money for travel. And I mean that from all income levels, so that everybody gets a chance to travel, because it would be really awful if only the privileged got to travel. But if all levels of income got a chance to travel, but maybe not every year and every second year, maybe it's every third or fourth year that we travel, and had some really, truly meaningful experiences. Maybe we're going a little bit longer. Maybe we're saving up our vacation as well, so that we're not getting as frequently on planes, but really having more deep, meaningful, and perhaps a slow tourism experience rather than that sort of fast Walmart, consumer experience that we have had up to 2019.
So, domestic travel becomes hitting the reset button, I believe is really good for domestic travel because it gets domestic to focus on the fact that it actually has great product and needs to invest in those products.
Yeah.
Is it 1973? Is the long woody station wagon coming back?
Geez, I hope so. I love those station wagons.
Totally.
I dreamed of being having that family that had that station wagon. We just didn't have it, but man, it might be back, right? It might be that we're just rediscovering our own country, regardless of where your country is. We have an amazing, amazing place to visit and discover ourselves. And I think that you're going to see, our provincial and state destinations highlighting the assets that they have within those places. But hopefully, they're also helping us find those off the beaten track places as well. Those little secret locations. In 2008, Destination Canada did a program called Locals Know, because we knew that Canadians were far more interested in traveling. They got more credibility for traveling outside of Canada than they did for inside of Canada, and we showed images of these exotic places, and we said, "Where is this?" And it turns out these weren't in Europe and these weren't in the Caribbean, but these were places in our own backyard, and we helped Canadians sort of rethink what a trip in Canada would be, and we converted over 1 million travelers who had intended to leave Canada but decided because of the campaign to stay home when we needed them most in 2008, 2009.
Right.
And I love that program. It was one of my favorite programs. And I'd love to see us sort of recreate that. Where are those exotic, interesting, and off the beaten track places in Canada that we just don't know about because we're too busy thinking and dreaming of travel abroad?
Well, and I think my former CMO Napier Simpson. He used to say, we sit here in Canada and we're always talking about how Americans should come up here and blah blah blah, and we've got the most beautiful country in the world. And he says, but you got to understand, Americans think they live in the most beautiful country in the world,
Right.
and they do, and they do. So, I mean, either of these countries, driving around from coast to coast is one of the most fascinating things you can do. And I love old cultures and I love driving through Europe, but I must admit, I got a penchant for driving through open forests and the wastelands of Dakota. It is a fascinating continent.
It is, and we're so fortunate to have access within our vehicles to do that kind of thing. So this is the year to rediscover, and we'll have some great stories to support that.
All right. In closing, if you could share, one or two things with all of your peers, in the spirit of helping get through this, which I know we're all focused on helping get through this. Any last words?
Yeah, just I think the most critical strategic component that we can have right now is optimism and hope. We have to help our colleagues get through this. We need those experiences. We need those hotels. We need those boutiques. We need the kayak operator and the whale watching tour, and we need the Zamboni, all of these tourism experiences to be there to help us recover our market. I know it'll look different, and I know it's tough for them, but we have to lend a helping hand. We've got some colleagues right now at Tourism Vancouver Island, who are developing programs. Their whole entire programming is to help SMEs recover from this, give them some information, whether that's marketing around social digital media. It's about programs that they can apply to get relief funding, to helping with their employees. They're focusing entirely on the recovery of that. And I think it's critically important that we help our colleagues make sure that they help them recover, so that when tourism does change, and when it does come back, we're ready for them.
So you're telling me that the future of destination management is just that.
Right. Working in that community, helping each other, understanding the challenges, but really working together to create a more vibrant future.
And I think that's where the pause and the reset can help us, because we as destinations aspire to be better. And this may be the chance where we can align some of those resources. I've never seen more opportunity for cooperation between civic bodies and tourism bodies and stakeholders. So I share your optimism, and I encourage everybody to build those networks that we're looking around and seeing are so substantive and helpful in those destinations that are doing well.
Absolutely. 100%.
Greg, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I hope to see you in person. Have a great day.
Thanks so very much, David. Stay healthy.
You too.
Take care.